picture, but then no one ever really is when they're up here. So Tom, I like to call him the fisherman because he gets a little bit excited about all sorts of weird subjects. Like if you ask him, what's a snail farm? He'll tell you, but he'll say, actually, the rules is not just about snail farms, it's about marine animals that you farm. So he'll get really passionate. It's my job to rein him in, so I'll be standing right next to him, and he and I will be working together to explain to you what are the various loopholes that people are trying to exploit and the legitimate ways of managing rates. So, fisherman, you're welcome to come up, mate. I'll click for you and keep you under control.
Thank you.
After you.
No, I mean, Bassam's just suggested Mr. Bond. I think maybe that could replace Fisherman, maybe?
Might do.
I think that might be slightly better. I've also heard Apprentice to the Dark Lord recently, which... Yes, I'm not sure about that one either, but...
It's a Darth Vader link, though.
Nice. Do I go next slide? What do you want me to do here?
So absolutely. We're going to do a lot of this together, because this is very much about my experiences of what we've seen. And Tom can bring the legal side to it. Because again, sometimes we'll get passionate about it and say, oh, this just feels wrong. And they'll say, well, actually, in the law, it's right, but you can look at this from another angle as well. So this is a roulette wheel we created. And the theme here is, how do we want to go forward as a sector? We want to carry on gambling and playing. It's like playing chess with a taxman. You make a move, they'll make a move, etc., etc. But if we kind of just play a little bit fair, then we just move our way away from this concept as well. So this is the options you have to avoid empty rates. We'll run through them very quickly. We'll go to them in a little bit more depth on the next slide. But this is everything we really want to focus on for today. And we'll kind of hopefully take you on a journey on what you can do better if you're not already doing these things. So 0, we think, is the answer. We'll come back to that in a bit more depth. Corporate social responsibility, environmental social governance. Work with the charity sector because it brings you multiple feathers under one hat. So A, you'll save money. B, you're helping the charity sector. You're helping the community, the likes of Darren, real life people. You'll hear some more stories like that. And that is pretty much the best way to go if you've got a building that is otherwise empty. And lo and behold, you may end up with a long-term tenant as a result, or something a little bit different like what's happened with the Unite accommodation upstairs. This is something that they love. And it's just something that works for everyone. Snail farms. Control yourself, Tom. You can talk about it later on. But that's one that he'll expand on because it's one where people are saying, oh, it's a farm. I've got one in Chancery Lane. I've put a snail box in an office in Chancery Lane. I don't have to pay rates. It's like, are you serious? But if you want to take on Camden Council, you can. Manage insolvencies. People used to have friends that would set up a company for them, which would go bust 2 days after the tenancy starts and say, it's not my fault they went bust. Liquidators don't pay rates, so no one pays rates, and this could go on indefinitely. That has been deemed to be, I think, borderline a crime.
Yeah. I think that one's stopped.
But yeah. Now. So some of these ones are kind of already ineffective. So we'll run through the list. There's a few more there. We'll kind of go through them as we go along. But you can kind of get the gist as to it. Some are good, some are bad, and just
some are really bad.
Some are really bad. Yeah. And we'll kind of just take you on that journey as a whole. Okay. Shall I click?
Yeah, go for it.
Right, so we've kind of split this into 2 categories for you. The ones that are already ineffective, but we think the government might squeeze some of them a bit more just to make sure that people don't try it on again. The ones to watch, which are in black, and again, the one that we think is safe, which is the green one. Tom, do you want to talk about snail farms?
Yes. I can't wait.
60 seconds.
So the idea was, I don't know if any of you remember it, but it was towards the end of last year, there was a bit of a news story where there was a large office block in Liverpool, I believe, and effectively the council had been in there and it was just full of these shoe boxes of snails. The idea behind it is they're saying that it's used to grow snails for human consumption, which is obviously ludicrous. I think they worked out that the snails being grown in there, you could possibly sell the 50 odd shoe boxes for a total of about £100. So obviously the main purpose of it is to try and avoid business rates. I think effectively, I don't actually know of one instance of this working. I honestly believe what the snail farmers do is they more use it as a facade. It's quite eye-catching when a councillor goes in there and it gets a bit of a story. I imagine what they're actually doing is one of the other methods, but it's obviously takes the eye a bit. It's a bit of a mouthful, I guess. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a snail pun there. I haven't got one. Yeah. So
once you put a snail farm in and the tax man comes after you, if the council can be bothered, this is the other thing. They kind of hope that councils can't bother to take you to court and all the other faff that comes with it because they're under-resourced. If they do, then the court will say, this is a farce, you need to pay the rates. And at that point, then they'll say, oh, my company's going to go bust.
Yeah.
And then it goes into liquidation. So it's almost like getting 2 or 3 bites of the cherry. So you've tried the snail farm thing, that didn't work. You can say you had the snail farm there for 91 days and then claim 3 months rates relief. And if that doesn't work, then you can go into kind of liquidation status. So all of these, it takes a lot of effort for a council to undo this stuff or actually fight it. And some councils don't bother. The likes of Camden, City of London, will take you to the cleaners over something like that, but it's a lot of effort. And then you need to prove that this was a deliberately fraudulent, is that too strong a word? Are we allowed to say that?
I think the snail farms, I don't think there's little debate there, to be honest.
Okay, and then it's this effort to kind of get through all of this stuff. So the reason we're mentioning all this is when it comes to what we think is going to happen next and how the government's going to try and stop this sort of manoeuvring game that happens, you'll see kind of the solutions that they'll come up with. Managed insolvency, very similar. Again, there was a case, I believe, that says...
it's Hurstwood v. Rosendale. And the idea is that we're making special purpose vehicles which only existed to go into liquidation or dissolve, and they would grant a lease to these companies, and then the concept is then that where the debt is held by a company that is insolvent, it then passes to the Crown, and the company, by the landlord, theoretically doesn't pay anything. The courts, it reached the Supreme Court in 2022 and was quite emphatically shut down. I think the judges there were almost suggesting this could be a criminal activity in the sense that it's a misuse of your role as a director. I think it's probably stopped since then. The way they shut it down is they just said these companies actually had no physical right to occupy. I think that's often what they're going to do to shut down the snail farms and maybe some of the others that we might mention, is that if you create this sham company and have it for what is ultimately just tax avoidance, no matter if it's snails going insolvent or religious worship, as we might touch on later, it's not going to work. And I think that's all stemmed from that Hurstwood case. So this one is kind of conclusively done.
I think just 2 things I'd like to clarify on this one. So if you're a landlord of a Paper Chase or a Debenhams or someone like that, you've got nothing to worry about if they go under 2 or 3 days after you sign them up as a tenant, because there's no way you would have known that they were about to fail. So that is safe.
Yeah, it's not saying that. It's only when you are granting it solely to these companies that only exist to go. If you grant it to a company and they happen to go, that's obviously fine. But if you grant it to someone knowing that this business is going to go insolvent and you've agreed, right, you need to go insolvent, I'm only going to give you this lease if you go insolvent, that's when you're in trouble.
Okay, and then the other one is if you have someone, if you, as a landlord, kind of know, or you should know, that when you've given this lease out, it's all a bit of a farce, there's an increased risk of the court saying, we're going to pierce the veil of incorporation and we're going to go after the landlord.
Yeah, they'll say the lease was invalid, and despite the fact that you've given the lease to this company, they'll just say this wasn't a valid lease. You actually didn't impart the right of occupation to this limited company, and ultimately the landlord would stay liable and they'll be on the hook for the rates rather than the operator of such a scheme.
Okay, so is that what's currently happening in that Guardian newspaper article with Dover Council?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so that's where it's at. I'm sure someone's going to try and appeal it, but if common sense plays out, then this will probably still be the outcome, but I'm no judge, so I can't say that for sure.
Yeah, if we wanted to touch on place of worship, we might be skipping a bit, but yeah, that is...
Let's save our prayers for later. We'll do that later.
Nice.
Guardians. We've actually got 2 Guardian companies in the room. So until about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe it's 8, Guardian schemes, as in putting someone not quite living there with a tenancy but living under a license, as a security arrangement, would get the organisation out of business rates. It would kind of shift to council tax. That closed down a few years back.
They've shut that down. So obviously there's still valid reasons to have a guardian to protect a property for security purposes, but I think the concept of this was a little bit more not for that. It was, the other purpose was to move it from business rates to council tax, which is capped at, you're not going to pay council tax for more than 4 or 5 grand, while business rates are uncapped really in terms of the rateable value. So it was always going to be a lot cheaper, and they've shut down that pathway to make it go from business rates to council tax.
Okay,
but
cool.
Obviously there is still the valid reasons to have security.
And look, that's no small thing. So both of the organisations there, 2 Guardian companies here, they do great work, and we've worked together, and sometimes they've got buildings, sometimes we've got buildings. But the business rates thing is something they can't help with. but the security and stuff is something that they are really, really good at. So please do kind of grab a chat with them as well afterwards. Small business rates relief, putting a mate's company into a relatively small room where the rateable value is less than 15,000. Would you like to explain that?
So effectively, small business rates relief, the concept is if you have one property, if you have a legal entity and it's your only property, then the government wants to kind of encourage small business. So it makes you fully exempt if your rateable value is below 12,000. It then phases up to 15,000, and anything over 15,000 is no longer eligible. So the concept here is if you have multiple offices within a block and you split it up and you put one, say, Shalish 1, Shalish 2, Shalish 3 limited in each of them, they could all theoretically qualify for small business rates relief and you'd be exempt. I think this one could work, but it involves so much legwork, and you are also running the risk that the council are going to be like, that lease isn't valid, these are all the same business in there, and you lose it all. So there is the risk. I think if it's done right, it works, but I think to do it right involves a huge amount of work, and you have to live with it as well.
Okay, so as an example, I think Tom mentioned this to me, so I think Westminster Council are really on top of this. So they'll look into the background history of each of these companies claiming small business rates relief and say, well, hold on, it was set up 3 days ago. It's very similar to this other one where you're also the director. And then they'll say things like, well, have you registered with HMRC for corporation tax, et cetera, and then filing accounts, and they'll just keep an eye on you. Some other councils will be like, yeah, fine, we'll just give it to you. They can't be bothered to look at it. But again, it seems to be a lot of effort. But
it's the important thing as well, which I didn't mention, is if you ever apply for small business rates relief, it's very clear when you apply for it that you are saying everything that you're submitting is correct, and they can take you to court for fraud if they believe it. So you are playing a dangerous game with it.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Box shifting and Bluetooth device using for what used to be 91 days. Sorry, it used to be 6 weeks.
Yeah.
43 days. That's gradually started shifting already. So we'll just run through England, Scotland and Wales. We've put it under already ineffective, but I think there might be a bit more squeezing going on. So just to run you through the 3 different countries, who've got slightly different approaches. It used to be 6 weeks. It changed to 13 weeks under the last Tory budget, which is just almost 12 months ago. So that started moving the box shifting and the Bluetooth device using model to not as effective as before. Kind of still works. In Wales, it moved from 6 weeks, 1.5 months, to 6 months before you can qualify for that relief. So that pretty much quashed it completely. It's just not worth paying rates for 6 months to get out of it for 3 months. So model doesn't really work there so much. Scotland went full out. Again, something I've learned from Tom. Basically, it's up to the local council to decide whether they think the applicant is worthy of empty rates relief. So on average, how many do you know of that in Scotland that actually give it?
They've devolved the whole issue. So I think each Scottish government, councils? Councils, yeah. That's my knowledge of Scotland there. They come up with their own rules. So I imagine in some councils it will work, but the vast majority aren't going to like this, and they'll follow the pattern there. I don't know the number, to be honest, but I don't think it's many.
Yeah, the ones I've seen, the Glasgows, the Edinburghs, are like, there's no relief whatsoever. Yeah. As soon as the tenant's gone, you're paying rates. They have got other things, like nice things, where if someone's there for 6 months, you might qualify for some sort of relief as an occupier after 6 months for months 7, 8, and 9. But it's not quite what was here before. And again, part of this is because it's a move by the government to quash the abuse that's been going on over the years.
I think it's going to go further in terms of stopping this as well, because there's currently a court case. I think it's in the High Court now, where effectively they're kind of disputing my point I made earlier about Hurstwood and the validity of the lease. Given the concept of this is you're occupying it for 13 weeks. Effectively, the company is granted a lease to occupy for 13 weeks, more or less purely to try and get another 3-month exemption afterwards. So I think the courts are really testing whether or not that lease is valid and whether or not the landlord actually did remain liable for that reset period. So it could be that later this year, if it reaches the Supreme Court, this gets shut down for good as well. It seems likely they might do little moves, like Shalish, I believe you think they might move to Wales and extend it to 26 weeks, but they could fully just end this as well.
Go Scottish.
Go Scottish.
All right, okay, fine. Okay.
Braveheart.
All right, no worries. So we've got the ones to watch there. We'll run through those as well. But I'll click onto the next slide so you can kind of see where we're going with this as well. So hopefully, I mean, if you want to take a picture of this slide, we'll obviously send this to you afterwards. But this slide and the next two, and the next slide as well, at least, are probably the ones to kind of take as a takeaway as to what you think you might want to prepare for. We might get this completely wrong. But if we've got the rough gauge right, then these are the sorts of things that might be happening. So there might be the creation of a czar of the GAR. Do you want to explain what GAR is?
Yeah, it's a general anti-avoidance rule. I think it applies to every other tax, where if you're avoiding tax, then they can just be like, you're avoiding tax, this isn't working. That doesn't exist in business rates. There is no GAR for business rates. So one of the suggestions that the government have proposed in their consultation is the possible implementation of a GAR for business rates. That would kind of conclusively shut down a lot of what we see with the already ineffective schemes. My potential query of it is, who is the czar? Because I would like to know who that is. My knowledge of some of the larger agencies, they do engage with some of the maybe unethical forms of rates mitigation, and I think they have an ear and a lot of power in the industry. So it would need to be someone who is impartial and will make the correct decision.
I think Tom's being a little bit polite here, so let's spell it out a little bit. So on one side, you've got agencies who will put one government agency up against another. So for example, NHS England tried to do box shifting in Harlow, and I think they saved quite a lot of money. It went to court. Harlow Council spent thousands of pounds on legal fees and lost. So one government agency won, one government agency lost. So the only real winners was the advising rating agency and some lawyers. And it's like, well, that doesn't feel right. So that's the sort of thing I think the czar is going to be around to stop. But going the other way, and this is another Tom story, I'll say it because he won't. There's a jewelry shop in Camden where just because they kind of keep the door locked to make sure the right sort of character's coming into the shop, the council has said no to retail leisure hospitality relief.
It's not even that. They sell wedding rings, so they work on an appointment-only model. So not really many people can walk in off the street. They only let people in because it's an intimate affair when you're purchasing your wedding ring. And effectively, they've said, Camden have decided that where there is that slight barrier, they subsequently don't qualify for retail relief, which is it's a lot of money to this small independent jewelry shop who are just trying to create the best possible customer experience. So yeah, that's always been my worry, is if the power is given too much to the councils, then you get the danger of they don't necessarily have the best interest in mind, or they might not make always the correct decision, at least in my opinion. But I do think this one should have got it. So.
Okay, all right, calm down. Okay, I can see Bassam scribbling everything down quite vigorously there, so hopefully it will be remembered. Okay, so the guardian of company law, making sure that if something's a crime, someone will go after the people that actually do this. Protect small business rates relief for the real people. Faster and fairer decisions, as covered by Tom. We had an interesting one. One of our shops is a free bookshop. And 40 locations around the country, every single council, except one, has said, yes, you're entitled to retail leisure hospitality relief. Because remember, that was introduced after COVID. It's like, okay, just because the pricing is set at zero, but people donate what they want, it's still in the spirit of having a shop, like a Waterstones. But one council is absolutely adamant about not giving it to us because the pricing is zero. It's like, come on, guys.
They said it's not a sale. So
it's not a sale.
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
So we might have to price those books at 1p a go. So let me know what you think about that. We'll see what happens. Okay, another one. So capping liquidations for legitimate ones, as well as, obviously the fake ones are kind of out anyway, but legitimate liquidations might be capped at 9 months. Because at the moment, if something goes into liquidation, whether it's Debenhams, Paperchase, or any of those guys, they'll stay with the tenancy holder's liquidator for forever and a day. There's no effort that they put in to disclaim a lease because it's not costing them any money, and it's not saving them any money either. But again, the government's kind of like, hold on, these buildings are sitting around doing nothing for months and then years, so they might put a cap on that because, again, it's about encouraging the reuse of and regeneration of these spaces. So we can see that as a potential one that might be coming. And then, as Tom mentioned, the cap, the squeeze, or actual squash. So the cap might be you can only claim empty rates relief for 3 or 6 months Once a year, perhaps, that could be the cap, so you can't keep doing the repeat thing. To do go Welsh, basically, is to extend the period before you qualify, and to go Scottish is just to say, we ain't having it unless it's decided at a local level, or if the Tsar says yes. So these are, again, the manoeuvres that might be happening as a result of the consultation. Okay, the ones to watch. These are the ones where nothing's changed lately, but again, it's just something that might just crop up. Listed buildings, we've had ones where we were there, the landlord wanted the extra comfort of the security, but operating it as a business, and hence charitable use rather than guardians. And then when he sold it, we were told that the tenant, the buyer, was going to move in, and 3 years later in Lincoln's Inn Field, there's no one in there. And it's a listed building, so they're not paying any rates either. So again, there's probably an element of, well, if I'm not paying MT rates, there's no pressure for me as an owner to bring this back onto the market or make good use out of it. So again, we can expect that there might be a cap on those as well. Plus, these buildings deteriorate. If it's listed, the whole point of them being listed is to kind of keep that heritage going. So if there is a way to make sure that they're in use, then that's great. And that's part of the kind of encouraging them to be used properly. I'll cover the 1 month cap next in use because that's more of a charity thing, and then you can look after the other two. So some charities are being manipulated into asking councils for 100% relief rather than just 80 by saying that, okay, we've taken the lease today, we're not going to move in for a while because we're going to do like an artistic show for a day in 3 months' time. But because of that, we are entitled to 100% rates relief whilst it's empty. And then we use it for the day, and then we pay 80% for the day, and then we'll leave it empty for several months again. And there are charities out there who sadly have been manipulated into this way and done landlords lots of favors. So there's probably going to be kind of, well, hold on, that just seems to be excessive. If a new lease is created and a charity takes a month to get up and running, fair enough. But beyond that, you really shouldn't be asking for or getting extra rates relief over the 80% you're already going to get anyway if you're legitimate. So again, it's just one of those moves that might happen because there's been too much manipulation going on.
The only thing I'd add to that is if you did have a ZAR or some sort of level of devolution to the local level, that I think there is uses where a charity could need more than 1 month to move in, and there should be a sort of an allowance there for legitimate use. It's only really a problem when it is that kind of extended purely for the rates avoidance that is a problem. I do think there are charities that might need longer than a month, but the issue is that's part of the problem with having these rates avoidance is the people that get hurt are the charities that actually benefit from these sort of measures put in place by the government.
Okay, great stuff. So just covering off number 4 on the left-hand side, we don't think that's going to change much. It's about small rooms. Small rooms are generally exempt. I think it's just too much admin, not enough money, and it just doesn't seem right to penalise people with those sorts of rooms. Which is interesting. You'll see some landlords who slice up big rooms into small rooms just to qualify for this relief as well, which seems like an effort. But if it makes sense from a business perspective to make small rooms as serviced offices, then it kind of makes sense. But it seems a little bit too much effort to go. Okay, so this is one Tom sees a lot. Destroying the insides of a unit. When does that work and why?
Yeah, so the idea is that if there's no possibility that no one can actually beneficially occupy a space, then it gets removed from the rating list and effectively has a nil rateable value. I think people try it a lot where they kind of mothball a building, effectively take out all of the utilities. I mean, it does work, but the issue is you are destroying your building. It's the long-term prospect of your building is reduced by doing this. I mean, I think if you want to do it, but
it's not necessarily clever.
Yeah.
Okay. But listen, I mean, we've seen some landlords who have got a good relationship with the VOA in some parts of the country. Like we're talking like an ex-Debenhams, where it's sitting there, it's costing almost £1,000 a day in empty rates. And they're like, if I strip out all the lighting, take out the toilets, will I get out of rates? And the answer is no one really knows how friendly the VOA is in that area. And if you do the same thing in a different VOA area, you may not get the same answer. So again, it's a bit of a roulette wheel job.
Yeah, there is a case. I can't remember the name of the case off the top of my head. It's the one I sent you the other day. But effectively, there's a principle that if it's economic to repair the building, then the VOA will assume it should be repaired. And I believe that the cost of that is 5.4 times the rateable value. if the VOA want to go down that line of argument, they could always do that. I believe replacing toilets is probably, in most places, is not going to cost, if in a regular shop which might have a 20,000 rateable value, it's not going to cost 100,000 to put toilets back in. So as Shayla said, and as I said, I do think it works quite often, but if it gets challenged too far, they could defeat that quite easily.
Okay, and do you think the Tsar could take on this power, or is this like he's becoming the VOA and...
I think the VOA probably is a good Tsar, if we were going to pick anyone, but yeah.
Fine, okay, great stuff. And then this is everyone's favourite, the one on the chair, the alleged place of worships. So this is the latest top topic. It does make us laugh, because when we read this thing about Dover Council, and Tom was approached about this by the Guardian newspaper, it was like, it's a deep sigh of breath. It's like, are you really trying to work with God to avoid tax at one extreme? So, Tom, I'm going to let you explain this, because I can't find the words to deal with this one.
To be honest, I don't think it's the worst idea in a very micro level. For example, we have employees who are required to pray once a day, and when we've been looking for office space, often one of the first questions we ask is, do you have a prayer room or somewhere where our employee can pray? More often than not, the answer was no. So I think having this sort of concept which they've come up with, which is taking an empty space and putting a place of worship in there, it's a nice idea, and I think people should be rewarded for doing that. The issue is, and for example in Dover, the council are accusing this company of having 60 places within one business park. I don't believe there's any legitimate reason to need to have 60 prayer rooms, no matter how big the business park is. On the business park's own website, they're only advertising one prayer room. So there is a level there where if you take it too far, you're going to then remove that actual genuine benefit that could exist. And that is the shame around this. It's not a terrible idea. There is some ethics there, and there is some genuine good that could happen from this. The issue is that is likely not what's happening, as the Guardian have expanded upon. For example, Rob Davis, who wrote the article, was speaking to Shailesh and I, saying how he went down to the pub, which is featured in the picture on the article, and he could see it's boarded up. There's no way that pub is actually open for religious worship. But they're arguing it nonetheless, and all it's doing is costing the council's time and money, and again, it's taking away what could actually be a nice idea.
Okay, cool. And this is another example where kind of the veil of incorporation has been set aside, and the landlord is now liable again.
So in Dover, they're arguing currently in court along the lines of the Hurstwood argument, where they're saying there is no legitimate lease here. All you're doing is granting it to this, I think it's a Hong Kong company that actually has no right to occupy this building. You've only done this to claim this rating exemption. I don't think it's going to succeed, but obviously I can't predict that, and I don't know the arguments that are happening in court.
Okay, but this is happening in court, and
yes,
round two
across the country it's happening. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, deep breath, everyone. You guys ready? There's not much more on the hard stuff, I promise. Okay, so this is now getting to the nice, fun, lighter bit. So this is the bit that we're really here for from our side, which is this is the bit that we think is not going to change much. CSR, ESG use, genuine charitable occupation, we think is the one bit that we think is going to stick and be safe. And there's a whole raft of reasons for that, which we're going to run through. So there's long-standing tax breaks, in particular for business rates. They've been around for a while. Public sentiment is in favour of supporting charities. You've seen that with gift aid. Not every country has the equivalent of gift aid, and the equivalence there. And it's consistent with other tax breaks that we're going to tell you about as well for the property sector in particular.